The auditorium was a sea of murmurs and soft lights, the air thick with anticipation as parents adjusted their phones to capture the perfect shot. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap, my eyes fixed on the stage where my daughter, Emma, stood poised in fourth position. Her chin was tilted just so, her small frame radiating a confidence she'd spent weeks perfecting in our living room. At 8 years old, she glowed under the spotlight, her ballet slippers scuffing softly against the polished wood as she waited for the music to begin. This was her moment, the solo she'd practiced every night, twirling until she stumbled, giggling, begging her father to watch. But he wasn't in his seat. I'd noticed his absence the moment the house lights dimmed. At first, I thought he'd slipped out for a call. Work was always his excuse, the one I'd heard too many times to count. But as I glanced toward the side doors of the auditorium, I saw him through the glass, halfway across the parking lot, his hand resting on the small of another woman's back. She was laughing, her head tilted toward him in a way that felt too familiar, too intimate. My stomach twisted, but I didn't move. I didn't call out. I turned my eyes back to Emma, who was rising to her toes, her arms arcing gracefully as the first notes of her music filled the room. He'd sworn to me once, years ago, that his ex was out of the picture. "I only ever loved you," he'd said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on mine as if he could will me to believe him. I'd found the old photos tucked away in a shoebox he thought I wouldn't notice, faded Polaroids of her smiling beside him, her hand on his arm. I'd asked about them, and he'd flinched, promised they meant nothing. I believed him, not because he was convincing, but because I wanted Emma to have a father she could look up to, one who'd be there, clapping when she took her bow. But tonight he was out there, holding someone else like she'd never left, while his daughter danced alone. The audience melted as Emma began her solo, their whispers turning to soft gasps of admiration. Phones glowed in the darkness, capturing every spin, every leap. She was flawless, her movements precise yet effortless, the product of countless hours practicing in front of our couch, her shadow stretching across the wall. I clapped harder than anyone, my palms stinging, my smile fixed for her sake. But inside, I was burning. He slipped back into the auditorium just before her final pose, his jacket wrinkled, his breath quick, as if he'd rushed to make it back in time. He slid into the seat beside me, muttering something about traffic, about not wanting to disrupt the performance by climbing over people. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him. Emma caught his eye as she curtsied, her face lighting up with a smile that made my chest ache. She thought his presence made the night complete. That's when I knew this wasn't about me, it was about her. When we got home, I poured myself a glass of water, the kitchen quiet except for the hum of the fridge. He was still talking, spinning excuses about why he'd stepped out, how he'd seen most of her dance. I let him ramble, rinsing my glass slowly, drying it with a towel, and placing it back in the cabinet with deliberate care. Upstairs, I tucked Emma into bed, smoothing her hair as she asked if Daddy liked her twirl. "He thought you were beautiful," I said, my voice steady, because it was true, even if he hadn't seen it. She smiled, her eyes heavy with sleep, and I kissed her forehead before turning out the light. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I opened Emma's backpack and slipped the recital flyer back out. The winter showcase was 3 weeks away, a bigger event with a larger audience. I marked the date in my planner, my pen pressing hard enough to dent the paper. That weekend, I met Emma's ballet teacher, Miss Cara, for coffee, under the guise of volunteering to help with costumes. She was warm, her smile genuine, always grateful for parents who stepped up. Over steaming mugs, I asked if the kids would be giving thank you speeches again, like they did last year. She nodded, her eyes bright. "Emma might want to say something," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "Of course," Miss Cara replied. "Just send it in ahead of time." I spent the next evening at the kitchen table, crafting a short paragraph in Emma's voice. It was simple, heartfelt, a few lines about her love for dance, how it felt to perform when someone she cared about was watching, and one carefully worded sentence: "Thank you to the people who stay until the end and don't walk away when it matters." No names, no accusations, just the truth, sharp and clear. Emma rehearsed it once in the living room, her voice steady, her eyes bright with pride. When she asked if Daddy would be there, I smiled and said he wouldn't miss it. And I meant it, though not for the reasons he'd assume. He didn't notice the plan unfolding. Not when I printed the speech on crisp cardstock and tucked it into Emma's recital bag. Not when I reminded her to hand it to Miss Cara at practice. Not even when she came home beaming, saying they'd loved her speech so much they'd chosen her to go last. He just nodded, proud as if he'd had any part in it. The week before the showcase, I made a small tweak to his calendar. He's always been forgetful, relying on me to manage our family schedule. So I deleted an old, rescheduled meeting and replaced it with a bolded note: Emma's recital, final performance, must arrive early. When the reminder popped up 2 days before the event, he thanked me for keeping him organized. I smiled and said, of course. Emma asked if we could go out for ice cream after the showcase. Maybe take a family photo this time, because last time Daddy had left too quickly. I promised her we'd make sure he stayed. By Thursday, everything was in place. Miss Cara had approved the speech, adding it to the cue sheet. Emma's name would be called just before the final group bow, her moment to stand center stage, microphone in hand, with a full house watching. He'd be there, in the front row, just as he'd promised. The night before, while he sat on the couch with a beer, watching some game on TV, I labeled thank you cards for the other parents at the kitchen table. My hands moved steadily, my focus unshaken, as if I were preparing for a performance of my own. He didn't ask what I was doing, he never did. Not until it was too late. On the night of the showcase, he arrived early, his shirt pressed, his phone silenced, a bouquet of flowers in hand as if he were the one in the spotlight. He smiled at every parent we passed, laughed a bit too loudly at a compliment about Emma's curls, and sat tall in the front row beside me. "She's going to shine tonight," he whispered, his voice full of pride. I nodded, my eyes on the stage. She always does. When the curtain rose, Emma took her mark, her arms lifting with a grace that made the room hush. Her solo, third in the lineup, was flawless, every spin, every step, a testament to the hours she'd poured into her craft. He clapped loudly, his watch slipping down his wrist, and leaned over to say, "That's our girl." I just smiled, my gaze fixed on Emma. She was ready. The final group routine ended, the music fading into silence. The lights stayed bright as Miss Cara stepped to the microphone. "Before we go," she said, her voice warm, "one of our dancers has something to say. Emma, please come forward." My daughter walked to center stage, her curls bouncing, her cheeks flushed from her performance. She held the microphone with confidence, her small hands steady. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, take a quick second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep these moments alive. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Emma's voice rang out, clear and strong. "Thank you for watching us dance. It means a lot to me." She paused, her eyes flicking toward us in the front row. "And thank you to the people who stay until the end and don't walk away when it matters." The room went quiet. A few heads turned, one woman in the third row looking down at her lap. His hands, raised to clap, froze in midair, his mouth slightly open as the weight of her words settled over him. Emma curtsied, the audience erupted in applause, and he stayed seated, his face a mask of realization. For the first time, he understood what absence truly cost.